Welcome to Blind Shovel, an arts and music podcast. Today we get to hear the perspective of David Lauer, co-founder of Mystery Meat Media, a stop-motion animation studio in Northern California. Hope you enjoy.
Hello?
What's up?
Oh, hey. How's it going, Michael?
Good. How are you, David?
Doing all right. Just here in the studio. Just finished up a shot. And I realized I should have maybe asked for some prompts. I have no idea what you want to talk about.
No, I don't do that.
Oh, okay.
We just talk.
All right, for sure.
Because we haven't spoken in a long time. Are you still living in the Bay? I assume not. You must be living in LA, right?
No, I am not only living in the Bay. I have started a stop motion studio in the Bay. So
right, Mystery Meat Media.
That's right. Yeah. So I have been here now since 2009. I guess that's put it around 13 years here in the Bay.
Where are you from originally? I don't recall.
Massachusetts. So a little tiny town called Sudbury, Massachusetts, like a little colonial mythological town where they all dress up with tri-corner hats every so often and march around with muskets and stuff, reenacting Battle of Lexington and Concord. Moved out to the Bay for California College of the Arts. Been here ever since. Made it work.
Nice. Were you always interested in stop motion?
You know, I really started getting into it in high school. I had a art teacher named Mr. Justice, Mr. Shea Justice, and he still is a total badass, incredible artist. Really just, he had made like these scrolls of current events through his perspective. This is like, late 2000s. Wound up being like thousands of feet long that were getting displayed in museums because there were just these like enormous sort of diaries, visual diaries that he'd been constructing for years and years and years. But one semester, because I was one of those art kids that was just hanging out in the art room during lunch, he wanted to start an animation tutorial class. And we tried out a whole bunch of different types of animation. Him and Mr. Ken Kimura, those were the two teachers, and they just opened a whole bunch of different doors, from stop motion, hand-drawn animation, trying some really basic stuff out on like whatever came with like the Apple desktops we had at school. But I got hooked on animation. And it wasn't specifically stop motion then, but I did love like claymation and paper cutouts and stuff like that. But I was open to almost any type of animation until college, where I had determined that I wanted to go to school for it. But I kind of initially, I've since fallen in love with stop motion beyond any reasonable level of obsession. But the first thing that really got me into stop mo was that I didn't have to color things, like hand-drawn animation, coloring those things in. I have no good color sense. Maybe I've gotten a little bit better before, but there was this huge relief with stop motion where materials just have a color inherently, and you can choose things that way rather than applying them with colored pencils or markers or whatever. It's just, that spoke to me so much more naturally than like this second process where you have to color everything and ink it or whatever. It always haunted me. I'd always doing just like pen and ink stuff, all black and white when I was drawing.
Really funny weigh in. A really funny thing to be appealing. For me, it was like I used to have this like Lego stop motion set that came with a shitty little camera.
Oh,
And
hell yeah.
I just like the idea that I could make things literally come to life, which the name implies, obviously, animation. But I like that you just didn't want to color things. That's cool.
Yeah, I mean, I tried doing Lego stop motion earlier than the high school class, but I didn't have a special camera for it. My first camera was this little micro DV tape recorder, and so I could just press record and stop as fast as I could. And that was pretty much, I couldn't do a single frame, so it was just short bursts of video. And not being able to see what you're doing and everything. I used that more for like match cuts and doing like stupid live action videos with my buddies and having people teleport and stuff rather than full-fledged stop motion. I didn't really get into that until high school.
Are there any early memories of stop motion, whether it's like Ray Harryhausen or, for me, George Pal and Wallace and Gromit?
Cool. Yeah. Okay. George Pal
is ridiculous.
Amazing. Yeah. It's like just all wood replacements. Like the amount of labor that went into that must have been incredible. I would have loved to see his workshop.
I believe his first workshop was destroyed, if I'm not mistaken, by the war, because I think he's Hungarian. But yeah, I feel like, and even with Wallace and Gromit, one of their early studios was like entirely burnt down. That's the side, but that's just crazy to me, the determination of animators.
Yeah, I mean, worth putting out there that Wallace and Gromit studio was not destroyed by the Germans. I think that was a pretty accident. But yeah, I mean, those were like studios that were lost.
Yeah.
Which is just a culmination of so many people's work. But the first stop motion I ever got was a collection of Primus's music videos. There was an album, I think, called Animals Should Not Act Like People. And it was like a little, like 4 or 5 CD song or album, but 4 or 5 song album. But it also came with every single one of their music videos. And they had so much stop motion in their music videos. I mean, they had animation of all sorts, but they clearly loved doing stop motion. There was Lacquerhead and Southbound Pachyderm were 2 really like crazy stop motion videos. And then they also, I think they included this, not technically Primus, but another Les Claypool band did a cover of The Devil Went Down to Georgia. And that is just this beautiful, beautiful music video. And remarkably, it actually had credits, which you don't see in most music videos. And there were just like these lists of names, some of whom I've now met, others I've heard of the legends that were working on these projects. But that was actually Tracey Sweet was one of the puppet fabricators, and she actually was I had crossover with her over at Tippett Studios, and she's phenomenal rigger, both practical and on the computer. But that was a whole other chapter of stuff, doing stuff with Tippett, which came.
So Primus, these Primus videos are this initial seed.
Yeah, I mean, absolutely.
Before that, were you a young child who would draw and people thought you were an artist, or were you something else?
I think I was like a forest child. I would spend all of my time out in the woods. My parents' house was just right up against endless acres of just like public forest, and I would just do Lord of the Flies, paint my face in berry juice, and build little forts and make javelins and stuff. But I think if that really played into it, it was just now, waxing poetic about stop motion, it's all about like, it's the form of animation that you can have a physical relationship with. It's also like an emotional connection that you're making with it. It's just like you can't help but touch something and it triggers all of these juices to start flowing. And it's obvious, stop motion, you touch the puppets, but it's not as obvious just how sentimental you get about these puppets. If you're building one and it's got a face and it's got character, obviously, but if you're like animating a coffee mug or a pair of scissors, like suddenly those get loaded with all this sentimental value by the time you're done animating it. And I can't help but be a very sentimental person. I guess I don't know if that's from doing stop motion so much or what's clued me into doing stop motion, but this really helps me understand that like I can get attached to almost anything. There's a process that I can undertake and suddenly it loads up an object with all of this meaning for me.
Right.
I've never had that with hand drawn or a little bit of computer animation that I've done. It's never been like this, actual connection that I'm having with the subject.
Well, you could also take objects you already have a connection to and animate them, and that's obviously very appealing. Like a toy. That's how I used to do it. It was just like I already like Legos, and then it was just about building narratives around them. And I think the idea of making forts, at least I have 4 brothers. I don't know if you have siblings, but the feeling of those days of my youth it's the same feeling. I would imagine like building a little studio and having these little rigs and just figuring things out together probably appeals to the forest boy.
Yeah, 100%. I mean, it is a remarkably collaborative medium. I really do get to work with some incredible people who are not all, animation industry people, which has been one of the fun things about working at the Bay. Like Portland and LA are inundated with incredible stop motion talent. Just people are making movies and commercial studios all over the place. While that's not quite as much of a presence here in the Bay Area, there's a couple titans around here and it has a long history of stop motion, but we're also able to work with a lot of people who are bringing other craft talents to the table, and stop motion can use all of those things. You don't need to be savvy with a specific software. You don't have to be a perfect draftsman to join on a stop motion production. If you have the ability to wire things up, if you've got an eye for light, if you're good with a needle, if you know how to make stuffed animals, if you're good with paper. So it's just sort of taking all of these different people and building the fort of stop motion. And you just really get to discover some pretty incredible things along the way.
How many studios? So like, I'm just thinking about this from a economical perspective, but if someone wants to do a stop motion video, how many, I mean, you may not know the exact number, but how many studios specialize in that in America, in the world? Like how common is it?
Well, I mean, I can definitely tell you there are hotspots. Mm-hmm. There are probably just a handful, less than 10 studios worldwide that are able to make a feature film.
Is that your goal?
I think making original content is my goal. Whether that's a movie or not, depends on the story. I don't really hold the concept of a feature-length movie. I don't exalt it over series or short films or anything like that. I think as long as the story is being told in the appropriate amount of time, and if it's something that I get to tell as an original story, that would be incredible. That is absolutely a goal. Whether it's a movie or not is yet to be decided.
So would that be in contrast to doing like a Nickelodeon thing with these characters that are pre-established?
Yeah, I mean, there's a lot of fun things we actually got to do a Nickelodeon.
Yeah, I see that here.
project, and that was a blast. We were sort of joining in on a story that was already being told. A lot of the things we were doing on the first part of that was actually directly recreating Nickelodeon shows in stop motion. So they have toys of these things, and we're literally beat for beat recreating these drawn shows, which is as unoriginal as it gets, except
Right.
for the fact that we're translating it into the 3D. And so there's all these fun like engineering and lighting and technical problems to solve, but no narrative solutions are needed. But when we got to do original stuff, they gave us some working guidelines, like lots of color and have something happening all the time. Like we can't lose people's attention span for less than a second. So bam, 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 bam. Like the pace is frenetic, which is another thing that I don't think I'm naturally inclined towards, but it's such a fun challenge. I mean, it doesn't even matter if I've done so many stop motion projects that are as far away from my natural inclinations as possible.
Mm-hmm.
But it doesn't matter. I'm still so into it because it is still stop motion, and it just unlocks something that I can't help but bubble over about it. It doesn't matter how I am not the target demographic of whatever toy or show I'm a part of. I think I can just be enthusiastic about the process.
So it's an inexhaustible love that you have for it.
I mean, so far.
Well, how long? You said it's like about a decade?
Yeah. So I guess I started working on professional projects when I was 19, 20. So yeah, about 12, 13 years now. And that's not constant. There was a number of years where I was bouncing between computer animation and stop motion.
Really?
Yeah. My first stop motion break, I'd done a few, tried out these like join up on a studio that's right out of graduation. And, but the real break was, Mad God
Mm-hmm.
over at Tippett Studio. Tom Gibbons was a teacher over at California College of the Arts, and I was his only stop motion student. Everybody else was doing other forms of animation, and Tom Gibbons is a animation supervisor over at Tippett, and he is a true stop motion artist. I mean, it's not even about an animator. He's a full filmmaker. Has made beautiful, beautiful films, and he brought me in to volunteer on Mad God, and that was really my first exposure to so many different elements of stop motion. I mean, things I had no concept. I would have never figured out in a million years unless they were shown to me. And I volunteered on that for, I don't know, 10 years or so, 10 or 11 years. And I'd been working on Mad God for a couple of years. I graduated trying out a few, I had an initial animation job in San Francisco. When that fell apart, Phil Tippett invited me to do an internship for computer animation over at Tippett. And that turned into working on computer animated projects for them 5-6 years. I honestly
is that appealing to you? Having said what you said earlier about the physical touch and that connection, is that, I mean, I personally, if I had infinite time, I would do things physically still.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
I almost resent the fact that I've transitioned to like 80% digital drawing, but it's just efficient. But yeah, can you connect to the process the same way when doing it digitally?
I would say it is a cerebral form of the medium.
That makes sense. Yeah.
It's with stop motion. which will forever and always be my true love. It's a poetic thing. You do it, and even if someone asks you to do it again with just one tweak, it will not be the exact same. It'll have all these other little performance pieces. There are some studios, Leica, has you do almost the exact same thing on twos, and then you do it on ones for the final take, and it's supposed to be very, very similar. But almost always there's going to be some differences from take to take. But with the digital stuff, you can just narrow in on the smallest things. So, because it's just so iterative, you can just keep polishing it. I remember saving like version 162 on a certain file where it's just, you are nitpicking things to an incredible degree. And I don't mean to make it sound too negative about it. It was an incredible education. I would not be nearly the stop motion animator that I am without that time doing computer animation. I think the two of them can blend together and you can learn lessons from one or the other, but I can't. I think one of my favorite things to do is just to bubble over with excitement about something. That's just like, everybody wants to be excited all the time. Why not? And computer animation just doesn't do that for me in the same way as stop motion. But you get to really have some incredible opportunities and experiences and collaborative efforts with people in CG that I don't think could be possible in stop motion. I mean, unless you get to like a certain level where you want to talk about, the follow through of hair on an ear or something like that. It's just not really possible with stop motion. But that sort of granularity is something I can really appreciate. And I mean, I think that must also happen with your digital illustration. You could probably continue to refine things and maybe even spend more time on a digital drawing than you would practically, right?
Yeah, it depends what you're good at. For me, art is it's the initial process of ideation. So you have divergent, and then you need convergent in the end, right? Like you could have a million ideas, and then you need to strengthen the practice of committing to one and finishing one. I think I'm like pretty good at convergent. So the digital process just helps me finish things quicker. I don't get like super neurotic and nitpicky about it normally. But when I drew my comics physically, there was far more acceptance in a way where it was like, well, that's how that line looks. I can definitely get like, let's redraw that line a bunch of times, but it's almost like there's too much choice sometimes.
Oh yeah.
But in contrast, it taught me, I was afraid of using color early on because I didn't want to waste this tube of paint. But without that concern, I could just play with color digitally. And that helped me get to my color palette much quicker and without fear of losing money. So there's pros and cons there.
100%. Yeah. I mean, the more I do stop motion professionally for clients, the bigger pre-production element we have becomes digital, where I naturally want to just thumbnail and storyboard everything out with pen and pencil, take photos of it, and make a little rough draft version of the animation that way. But exactly as you're saying, you can just refine things, find your color palette, and create a mock-up that you can easily edit, so that by the time whoever you're working for is saying like, okay, like let's do this, there's no surprises, there's no questions. We aren't burning through all these materials, making rough drafts and animatics. But because like when you finally do the real take, you want to make sure everyone's on board with exactly how it's going to look, because redoing it is a pain. And that sort of commitment to the analog process that happens with stop motion is, I think, a really invaluable part of the medium, because we have so many digital processes that people can continue to change their mind about. It actually requires people to buckle up and commit, which I love that. Like, when it's done, it's done. You break down the set and there's no more, tweaks. It is what it is. And
the box is closed. Yeah. It reminds me of the horror of like art direction in terms of editorial illustration. The art director's just gotten more and more control over time because of what you're talking about. Whereas in the past, I had teachers in illustration school where they were like, I just showed up with a painting. I was given the prompt before, I show up with a painting, they scanned it, and that was it. There was no going back to, can you change this color? Can you change that? Mm-hmm. So that part kind of sucks, I think, where it's like the powers that be, the client, whoever's hiring you, they use you more like a tool when they can get all these revisions in place. But if they were truly to just trust you and take that leap of faith, that's the most freeing thing that could happen. Probably the best outcome too.
Yeah. I mean, I wonder if there's a way, or do you know if you have had clients who are more willing to do that?
The smart ones. Yeah. They recognize, like, I always think of No Country for Old Men. You ever see that?
Yeah.
Because Sugar, or whatever his name, he gets offended when Woody Harrelson is hired, because he was like, you pick the right tool and then you let that process develop. You trust that you chose the right person for the job and you let him finish the job. You don't intervene. That's how I feel like a good art director acts, is they understood that they chose the right person. They trust them and they put it in their hands, and they're not going to be like a helicopter parent being like, no, actually, this isn't going to work for us.
Yeah. I mean, I've definitely run into both schools. Some of my mentors are adamant that, if you're going to be a director, it's all about, a good director is a good delegator. You just get a badass crew around you. You get people you trust to pull the job off, and you let them do it. Conversely, and that's almost more of an experience I've had on like truly, cinematic projects. Movies get made with that more in mind, in my experience, compared to commercials, which I've had a lot more experience with people, where we actually like let them look through our camera. We have like a whole, connected network that allows the client to see the subjects that we're doing stop motion on and make sure that everything is like exactly up to code, because a lot of toys have specific lookbooks that they need to have a specific, touch here and there. The clothes sit exactly like this, or the accessories do exactly like that. And giving the client the ability to look through the camera has gotten me the closest to actually having somebody, they know that they can't ask for iterations. So they just interrupt you in the middle of the animation. It's like, rather than someone going into your painting and adjusting the lines and changing color palettes, it's like your hands are going to grab the puppet and you hear a whoa, 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 whoa. Can you change the eye line a little bit?
Yeah.
it's like mid-process. And that's about as helicoptery as I've ever experienced, which is something I'm happy to deal with. It's surreal to work that way. Letting the client see through my camera as I'm doing stop motion hasn't popped my cork. I think it's hasn't.
What does that mean? What is that?
I haven't blown up. I haven't gotten really frustrated and angry at a client before. Never yelled at anybody, probably. I don't know, maybe I could try and find someone I've yelled at, but that's something that's definitely out of the ordinary for a lot of other animators. When I was telling some folks about this system of just letting the client see exactly what we're doing, their eyes bulge. It's typical that you just, in traditional stop motion, you never interrupt or even poke your head in between the curtains of while the stop motion animator is at work. You don't want to cause a shadow or break their focus or something like that. But the thing is, in this weird work from home world that we're at, is that it's decentralized office corporate jobs, but it's also decentralized productions. So we've actually gotten a lot of work because we're willing to be part of this decentralized system, where we're willing to just like open up our cameras, let the client look through it. They don't have to be here. We don't have to be in LA. We can be animating things, get the client approval, and work out a system with them in ways that were not even thought of before this whole pandemic situation really tossed things on their heads. And it's opened up a lot of opportunities that's directly led to Mystery Meat Media and the formation of this studio.
Right. So obviously you have a certain professionalism about you. And did you always want to form this studio? Was that like an obvious outcome of
where
you were going?
This is the fruition of probably a 10-year dream. I think this was started in high school when I was just doing animation for the first time. It was like, oh yeah, all the original ideas I want to tell. Funny enough, nothing like creating my own studio to stop me from making original work, because it's just the busyness of running a thing like this is eating up a lot more of my free time. It's not so much of a clock out at 6 p.m. and work on my own stuff for the evening. But at the same time, it's impossible to think of making enough stop motion completely alone. My studio partner, Ree Crawford, made an incredible movie called The Moon's Milk. Wound up getting narrated by Tom Waits. It's about 15 minutes, and it took evenings in between his day job around 7 years to do.
Wow.
Now, it sounds like a lot of time, 7 years, but if 7 people worked on that and they also had day jobs and they made a 15-minute movie in 1 year, well, you could probably do that 15-minute movie in less than a year if everyone was dedicated towards it.
Right.
And suddenly, a crew of like 5 or 6 people spend 6 months and make a cool short film. That sounds awesome. Like, that is actually a remarkable turnaround for stop motion. But if I want to make as much stuff as I do, it has to be a collaborative effort. It has to be a joint effort. So making the studio is definitely the first step. And now it's just about establishing ourselves and sort of saving up enough surplus from these projects so we can try and make these projects happen in a way that isn't reliant on volunteer labor or donated time or anything like that. But actually, the other part of this dream is making a studio that has fair and generous wages, and that people are excited about working with, not just out of a passion, which a lot of people do in this industry, but also because it's a way that they can actually have a decent quality of life while still pursuing their passions. Because it doesn't have to be just one way or the other, and a lot of people get taken advantage of, myself included. Over the years, I've run into a few projects. It's just, I do the time over money received, and I'm making like $3 an hour or something like that when I wrap up. So it's just the idea of being able to pay people fairly is is huge. Like, I'm not going to make a movie where it's all interns or whatever.
Is there a studio you look at right now that you're trying to, it's like your North Star?
There are some really incredible studios down in LA that I feel like are 2 or 3 steps ahead of us. Open the Portal I have a lot of crossover with the crew and animators who've worked with that, and they've gotten into pitching their own shows. They're making original content, and they just have they're a big inspiration. They have definitely some different styles, but that would be an incredible place to get to. At the true North Star would be like the Czechoslovakian studios of the 80s and 90s of Yuri Trinka and Yuri Barta and Jan Svankmajer, Quay brothers. They had, a certain amount of government funding that isn't really possible in our context, that allowed them to just truly embrace the craft in a way that I haven't seen since. But I think that obsession with craft is something I really want to continue here at this one.
Yeah. Svankmajer's wild.
Yeah.
And I think just by it reminds me of, I bought this DVD of The Cameraman's Revenge.
Oh, the Starovich.
Yeah. And I love that DVD. That one's crazy. Speaking of using objects that are real, that you find, that one's made with actual bugs.
Yeah. I mean, I am blown away because that was early 1900s. I want to say the 19 teens.
Yeah, it's 1912. I'm looking at it right here.
Yeah. Okay. So that does line up, because I had heard Starovich was sort of he would make bedtime stories for the Tsar's children. And he also made movies after the Bolshevik Revolution and stuff like that. So he kept going, but that it just feels like this weird collision of my timelines. It's like monarchy and stop motion animation overlapped. That's just a weird one. Feels like, for a 100-year-old craft, has a remarkable amount of history to it.
Yeah, he's amazing. I mean, I don't know what it is. It's always, I love Miyazaki as well. I just love animation.
Mm-hmm.
Stop motion, especially Starovich. Is that how you say it?
I think it's
so. Yeah, there's just something creepy and strange, not in a Schwankmeyer way, which is overtly weird.
Yeah.
But The Mascot, which is 1933 by him as well, is insane.
Yeah, I mean, I think there's a direct infusion of someone's style in stop motion animation when they were shooting on film, because that we've lost with digital stop motion, because they didn't have any way of seeing what they were animating and double checking that their motions were smooth. All they had were surface gauges. I don't know if you've caught one of those pop on the frame.
Surface gauge.
So a surface gauge is a machinist's essentially pointer, a big metal weight with an articulated arm that comes down to a metal stick with a point on it.
Okay.
And the idea was that you could use it to you would start your frame, you would point it at the tip of the nose of a character, or the tip of a fingertip or an eyebrow. You could have dozens of these surface gauges pointed at different parts of your puppet. And so when you shift the puppet, you would see just how far it's moved from the last frame that you've oriented all these surface gauges to record. And then when you think you've got the right distances, because you'd remember in your head, the nose should be getting faster. So also remember to have an ever increasing gap in between the nose and the surface gauge. And that would track your speed. So you could have these like physical artifacts that you put on your stage in order to remember where you were last frame. Some people didn't use these. Some people did. Ray Harryhausen, if you frame through, Jason and the Argonauts or Sinbad or something like that, you can see he's forgotten to remove the surface gauge from the frame, and it just pops on and pops off for a frame. What
about that? What do you think? Why does that reveal the personality of the maker more, as opposed to the digital process?
Suddenly you're actually just there's no moderator, there's no computer that's in between you and that's like, oh hey, by the way, like you didn't move that shoulder quite enough, or hey, your animation's looking a little erratic, you might want to smooth things out, or you would shoot things on film and then you'd send it off to get developed, and it would take like a couple of weeks, or maybe you had a connection with the photography lab that would let you get your footage back earlier, but you wouldn't see what you'd animated for weeks. So you're just essentially going in blind, animating how you would naturally. Maybe you have a little bit of information from these surface gauges, but it made those like super creepy, frenetic movements that Starovich and all these like early animators, Willis O'Brien, is one of the American godfathers of stop motion, did like King Kong. And that was sort of Mighty Joe Young, were the ones where he and Harryhausen, or he was sort of bringing up Harryhausen as an animator. And it just sort of has this like creepy movement to it. There's just like this like, I don't know, it is like very obviously a doll that's come to life. And I think, with today's audience and how much animation we've all seen, we know a little bit more how like, well, that's not how a giant monkey would move. And it's like, okay, that's very much our lens through today. But at the time, like, people hadn't seen that shit.
Right. I don't know what they would have been thinking.
But it was, you didn't have something pointing out all of your errors and mistakes.
And by that, you mean like the process of editing. There isn't like a thing in the computer that tells you that it seems erratic, right?
Well, I mean, I am very much a digital stop motion animator. I am looking at, I'm going back and forth and playing the last like 8 frames, seeing how the motion is looping, and I'm a little far on those fingertips. That's a big move there. I'm going to go back to the puppet. I'm going to soften this. I'm going to, maybe I'll spend a couple more frames before I start jumping back up. Like I can review my animation instantly, and I can see how it's working with all the frames beforehand, which is stellar. It's incredible. You can really polish and make very deliberate choices, very informed animating. But at the same time, it goes against another philosophy of stop motion, where that sort of physical emotional connection. I'm bringing this like cerebral computer animation perspective of like making all these fixes, but Peter Lord, one of the founders of Aardman Studios, he is a proponent of like, you never break eye contact with the puppet. Like you're always looking at it. You do all the adjustments. You take the photo without staring away from it, and you go back to it, and you just sort of get into this trance with the puppet, where you're so connected to it that you just know how to animate this thing smoothly. You're in the zone.
That's
I've done that a couple times.
I was gonna say, do you try to recreate it? Try to set that limit, that constraint?
I I have a this is not a truly traumatic experience, but just I was given this as a challenge on Mad God, where this incredible lighter, Jim Opperall, worked on all sorts of crazy movies throughout film history. Just an incredible guy. Spent like 2.5 weeks setting up this shot in Mad God that is like the climactic reveal of part 2. It's like this epic shot of a man raising his torch to reveal that he is merely one of millions that have come before him. And it's like all this weight of the fact that he's part of this vicious cycle has come crashing down upon him. It's like this emotional climax of the movie. The entire studio has been working on it for weeks, months probably. And Phil asks me if I want to animate this. I jump at the chance, and he's like, okay, well, someone else is going to take the photos for you. And he just puts a surface gauge in my hand. It's like, you're going to do it blind. Seeing that this is his movie, remarkable amount of trust. And I get the shot. And ideally in this shot, you would have the slow dramatic rise. You bring the light up. It's washing over the set. You're revealing everything just like the director wants it. And you want to like sit on that shot. You want to have a few seconds for the audience just to absorb the scene. But I had just figured, well, he's lifted this thing up. I don't want him just to be there still. I need to like shift his weight. I need to have him like just slowly move his weight from in between his two legs to over his right foot. And instead of having a nice, undistracting weight shift that would just keep the scene alive, it was like Elvis hips. This pop, this little like sassy hip pop that I just started sweating bullets when I saw that this shot was done. And to this day, like the editors and the compositors will like bring up that Elvis hip hop from like 8 years ago.
Did they leave it in the film?
They did not leave it in the film.
Okay.
I feel like personally, it really needed a couple more seconds for the audience to look at it, but instead they just cut that. They cut that part of the shot short.
You tried.
I've tried, and I carry the weight of that challenge with me every day.
That's good. It's a good thing.
I should really try it again. You know, I would like to do it in a slightly less low stakes scenario. But that it gave me a profound respect for the people who've done it that way. It is a much higher anxiety form of animating. And it's also a lot more magical to see what you've done. I believe I was watching a video about Harryhausen's Medusa.
Oh, it's in. Is it Jason and the Argonauts? Or am I mixing it up? That might be
Sinbad.
Something else, yeah. And they were just talking about how many snakes were in the hair, and the fact that he was just like somehow remembering where they were all moving. You know what I mean? Unless I am mistaken, I feel like he wasn't. He somehow could coordinate all those different snakes, you know, and that's just insane to me.
That was one of the most complicated puppets I've ever seen in that era of Dynavision, which is what he called stop motion, just to get that extra little.
Oh, really?
Bring in the crowd. Yeah. And I mean, that was subtle, too. It's like balancing all of the snake's movement so that it's not like one of them is moving way faster and drawing the eye, but it's all still just like framing her face. It's an incredible scene.
Clash of the Titans. That's what
Clash
it is.
of the Titans. Yep. That makes sense.
I used to watch that a lot when I was young. It's just, I don't know if it's me, but it just seems like any child would be like, holy shit, what the hell's going on? I don't know if like modern children can see the difference, but speaking of Aardman, when I refuse to watch any film they make that's digitally animated because they just look and feel just like they genuinely feel horrible. It feels like a big mistake to me.
I mean, I think kids can tell the difference.
Yeah, I would think so. Yeah.
Like they're more savvy than ever before with what's on screen. When we were doing a little Nickelodeon thing, we were doing all of the mouths digitally. It's so much more time. All this stuff for printing and needs to be exactly on model to get all the approvals from Nickelodeon. So we had this process of like digital stickers that we could track onto the action figures and toys. And we sort of had this test audience. My buddy Ree has a friend with a kid, and at the exact right, demographic, the right age to see if he likes this. And his first comment was like, "Those mouths aren't real." His first thing he said, and it was just like the only thing that wasn't real in the entire. Everything was shot in camera, but it's those mouths aren't real. So it was, it was kind of affirming. Like that was the pragmatic, compromise we came to. But we've done practical mouths ever since, because it really does have it make a difference. So I mean, it's. Roger Ebert had a line that was like, practical effects look fake but feel real, while digital effects look real but feel fake. And
yeah, that's very true.
I love it. I love that line so much because it's just, I have a limited patience for subsurface scattering and particle effects and algorithmic hair animation and all these things that are, might make it feel real, might make it look real rather. But in the end, it's like a soulless automaton that's just pushing pixels. And I feel like if there's anywhere that I get like really like woo-woo spiritual, it's with animation. It's just like, people will pick up on all of these weird things that you might not realize, and we might not even have words for, where it's just like we can animate and people will realize it was a human pushing those snakes and Medusa's hair around. Right. It's not, and like that, even if it's just like an appreciation of knowing that it was a person who did that, this like intentful action that's seen on screen, it just feels like it hits me in a way where it just feels good in like the core of my stomach. Where it's just like, they nailed it right there.
It's
and like,
warm. There's a warmth.
Yeah, and it's not this cold, dead, robotic animation where it's like, oh, this thing doesn't look real, doesn't feel real. What if the top layer of the digital skin was slightly transparent so the light would bounce around and reflect off of the sculpted capillaries? It's just like, oh my God, guys, like this is the levels of illusion here. We're in the world of diminishing returns.
That's true.
I don't
think one day we'll talk about robots and humans like this, where they'll look very close, but we'll feel something. Maybe we thought we fell in love with a robot, but then we saw a human that we fall in love with. I feel like there's no way, because essentially, if I understand correctly, 3D animation is you're trying to put the world in a box and then create scenery within that, or scenes within that, and thus you would have to be able to recreate the world exactly for it to feel real. That is, if a human can even attain such definition.
You're starting with a blank slate, which puts you inherently at a disadvantage. You know, like even drawing something on paper, like there is a relationship that you have with the paper, the canvas, whatever it is, where it's informing how your stylus or your pencil or your paintbrush is moving across that surface. There's a back and forth there. You're collaborating with reality.
That's right.
You're working with something that's imposing real limits. Like gravity is going to affect paint. Gravity is going to affect stop motion. There's ways of fighting both of those things, sure, but it's something you have to account for. And it's not just a bunch of problems that you're overcoming. You get all these awesome bonuses for working with reality. Like the difference between like just lighting something, you know, actually putting a light on a puppet. It would take so much time and like rendering, or, you know, even for 2D animation, like you got to like draw all the shadows and light, but you can just literally shine a flashlight at a puppet and it just pops. It becomes more. And it's incredible getting to collaborate with everything that you can be curious about. You know, it's everything.
Yeah. No, it's a great medium, undeniably. Do you have time for your actual life? Given I know you work very long and it's very intense, the work, but like I've met animators, you know, who gave it their all in college, put out a nice little film, and then they were just like, you know what? I can't do this. I'm going to make illustration or comics, something that isn't so, I mean, comics is not a good alternative, but, you know, something that isn't so time intensive.
I mean, I have sort of made a life for myself where I have found a work-life balance that appeals to me. I mean, right now in the middle of a project, there is no life outside of work. But it's this roller coaster of, you know, feast and famine, where you go through a project that's this intense burst of energy, or, you know, maybe an intense marathon of energy. And then you come down and you have a time before your next project. Ideally, it's not just back-to-back projects, but it's that time in between where you're like processing and digesting all of the lessons and experiences you just went through. And you also, you know, travel or see friends a lot more often, you know, have a bonfire or something. And you can just reflect on the intensity of your experience and have the time to just like breathe. And then soon enough, you start getting that tickle where you want to be in that work dimension, where it calls back to you of like that weird alternate perception that you get when you're so invested and carried up in a project that you're obsessed with, where it just scoops you back up and you can't wait to start the next project. So it's not about a work-life balance day to day. It's a work-life balance like over the course of a year, if that makes sense.
Yeah, over a lifetime. It's a completely different way of working. It's obviously not a 9 to 5, and I'm sure when your mind is on it, you have to keep doing it. I'd imagine it's pretty hard to stop doing it once you're in the zone.
Yeah, I mean, I would say if I can, I like to never leave a hot set. A hot set being one that you're in the middle of animating and then you call it a night and you go home and you hope everything was the way it looked last night next morning. But that's just a reality. It's something that has to happen. You have to be able to have a set that can survive being on its own, being alone for a night or two, because sometimes it's just not practical to, do a 30-hour animation session. On these crazy feature film Leica jobs, they can spend weeks animating shots. The technology is there for it to happen, but there's something about having like an emotional through line of being in a specific state of mind for the course of a shot, that it does get interrupted when you have to sleep and come back to it. So it has given me a bunch of times where I'm, here until like 3:30, 4 in the morning or whatever. You finish and you look at your shot and you get this huge burst of dopamine. It is this incredible, intense, emotional experience of having finished a shot in the wee hours of the night, that I do look forward to. At the same time, it's nice having my own little studio so that I can actually like sleep in until whenever the next day. I'm not expected to roll in at 9 the next day every time if I'm burning the midnight oil. But it's hard to walk away.
Do you find that you have a very robust attention span because of this? I feel like, everything currently in society pushes people towards shorter attention spans, but you're doing something that requires, at least as I imagine, a very long attention span before you get that hit of dopamine that you speak of.
Yeah, I think I have taken all of my attention span and put it into this. I don't think I have a particularly good attention span outside of stop motion. I think if I'm not holding it, I forget it. If I like put something down, whoops, out of my brain. And it helps having a literal, thing that I'm supposed to be touching all the time to keep me rooted. But it's weird because it is actually a battle to have the attention span to animate, because there is like, with just both building other things, running a business, checking emails, whatever on the phone, blah blah blah, a million people to talk to. All of these things will keep me from animating, because it's just when I do a shot, I have the ability to be like, I can walk away, I can get interrupted and get back into the shot, no problem. But it's like it's like this wall of micro task bullshit that's in between me and animating. And I'm like, why am I hesitating to get into animation? Animation is my happy place, but like, it's just getting torn in all of these different directions, like doing all of these little tiny mundane distractions. And then I have to convince myself to start animating. And it's always the right decision every time. I hope people discover that, the joy of concentrating on something. Because I think a lot of people get, sucked into tiny attention spans because they're still looking for their passion. They're still looking for like the thing that draws them into a true concentrated state. I think for some people, that's other people. Some people have specific hobbies. Some people have found it and made it their job. But I think when people can concentrate on something, it's indicative of a love towards that thing. I hope people find it, because if we have this short attention span, the other side of it is like, are we falling out of love with whatever it is that we used to be passionate about? Like, why aren't we fixated on a thing? It's such a remarkable trait for someone when you realize, oh, they've been fighting that fight, they've been concentrating on this mission for years or whatever. It's cool to see somebody so invested in anything.
That's true. It's a good point. It's a very beautiful idea. And it is interesting that via submission to objective reality, you experience freedom. And I think a lot of people don't quite get that. They think they're going to find their passion in a certain way. Like they're going to scroll through a phone book of things you can do, and eventually one will stick out and they can try that. But I really do believe it requires dedication and submission. And I'm not sure I believe it could be anything. You know, I'm sure stop motion came to you when you came to it. But I think that, yeah, when you look at like Mad God, what is that, 30 years it says? 30 years in the making? And that's just, I mean, even at this age, I look at old people who've been married their whole life, and I'm like, wow, that's admirable, you know?
Yeah. I mean, it's hard not to get romantic about stop motion. I mean,
oh yeah.
I've had, you know, met new friends, or, you know, talking with people for the first time about stop motion, and they're like, oh, like, why? Like, what do you like about it? And sometimes the way that I reply, they're like, do you realize how sensually you're talking? Like, it is, you're verging on talking about stop motion erotically. And it's like, oh, whoops, like, guilty, I guess. I don't know.
There's nothing wrong with that.
Yeah, no, I mean, it's funny. It's like, it is a sensual activity. It is, it is a touch kinesthetic, like, interaction that you have with a puppet. It's more than, you know, sentiment. You're actually having a relationship with these puppets.
It also creates life. Oddly enough.
Yeah, you know, it's you know, whether it's like your child, or if it's a literal like ghost in the machine, you know, it's you're injecting your soul into this automaton, and it's always wild. There's like this threshold that I like to ask other animators about, for like, how many frames does it take for you to see the personality of the puppet you're working with? And it's like, for me, it's like between like 18 and 24 frames. So like 3/4 to a second, 3/4 of a second to a second. And then something like reveals itself to you, where you realize it's not just me pushing a puppet. The puppet's also pushing me around. It's telling me a little bit of what it wants to do. It's telling me a little bit of how it wants to, you know, how it's going to be articulated, how it's going to move its joints. It's bossing me around a little bit. And I'm just sort of doing what I can to let it be itself as much as I can. And I love it, because everybody that animates has this moment where it just clicks, and it's like, I'm not alone here. There's other spirit that's happening, and yeah, it is romantic.
I think that's a good note to end it on.
Yeah. Okay.
You know, so I appreciate you taking the time out. I know you got a busy schedule.
Well, you know, thanks so much for thinking of me and reaching out. I really appreciate just getting the chance to talk about all this stuff with you. And sorry if I was blabbing more than asking.
That's the point.
Yeah. I mean, I'm stoked. I'd love to hear more of your podcast. When does the series launch?
Oh, I'll probably start releasing them in a couple weeks. Yeah. That's
really exciting. Okay. Well,
yeah.
Make sure you send me a link, and I'll send it around.
For sure. I hope this inspires young people to try stop motion. I have very fond memories of it, and
it's so accessible. You know,
so
like,
easy. You got a phone. I mean,
yeah, right. Like, it's not. You don't have to, you know, have a studio. You don't have to have a powerful computer. You can just push puppets.
We need more of that.
Yeah, agreed.
All right. Have a good night.
You too. Thanks again.
Thanks for tuning in. Music by Dory Bavarsky and Mingja Chen. Next up, we have Al Gofa. Have a good night.